Today, we have a very special guest, Riccardo Spagni. Known for his pivotal role in the Monero project and now at the forefront of making cryptocurrency more accessible to the masses, Riccardo is leading the charge towards a truly decentralized future. He is the visionary behind Tari, a platform designed to make crypto mining and blockchain technology easy for everyone. We will be discussing the current state of crypto, the challenges of true decentralization, and the future of this technology. So, whether you are a crypto enthusiast or just curious about what's next, this episode is for you. Riccardo, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Matteo.
Let's get started with the basics. What do you do today for a living?
So I work on a number of projects. A lot of my time, in fact, the bulk of my time is spent working on Tari. But I am still active in the Monero community. I'm still active in the Open Alias community, working on developing Open Alias 2.0, which is an aliasing standard that I invented. And still working on YAT as well, which is an emoji-based identity system for the internet. So, you know, my fingers are in many pies, but I am a firm believer in my work being important from both a privacy preservation perspective and a freedom enhancing perspective. And so I try to make sure that those are foundational.
Very good. And how deep into the weeds do you get? Will you define, if you were to define what do you do during the day, how much time do you spend coding? How much time do you spend directing teams? How much time do you spend connecting the dots between different people across the world? How would you define that?
Yeah, so I mean, I spend a lot less time coding nowadays than previously. I still, you know, try to keep my skills relevant. But at the end of the day, you know, there are engineers who are a lot better than I am. And so I tend to leave all the heavy lifting up to them. You know, I don't sort of expect my skill set to be too narrowly focused there. So I spend a lot of time ideating. I spend a lot of time creating and inventing, and then helping developers, whether they are in the open source community or developers that work for one of my organizations, to execute on our shared vision, on, you know, the vision that we've all come up with together.
Very good. Riccardo, you have been deeply involved with Monero for a long time. Can you take us back to the early days and share what led you to get involved with cryptocurrency and blockchain technology?
Yeah, sure. So by way of background, I discovered Bitcoin in early 2011. I read a Slashdot article about a Google engineer that was writing a library rather, Java library for Bitcoin. And I was tangentially aware of what Bitcoin was, but I hadn't really, you know, dug into it until that point. And when I read this article, I was kind of enthused. I was like, oh, wow, you know, I mean, like a Google engineer, this is 2011, you know, Google engineers were considered to be important. And I was like, if a Google engineer thinks it's important, maybe I must take a look at it. And so I dug in. And my first reaction was, I don't think this is going to work. And it wasn't for any financial, you know, like economic reasons. I just didn't really understand a Nakamoto consensus. And I had this idea that if I could flood the network with bad nodes, that I could sort of overpower some of the nodes and feed them false information, which is a real attack that can happen. But what I didn't understand was how easy it is for a node to discover which is the true blockchain through the power of cumulative proof of work difficulty. And so I spent a lot of time building tools to break Bitcoin, and much to my dismay and joy, they didn't work. And that was really, really interesting. So from that, I got involved in mining. I think it's a fairly common path. I thought mining was fascinating. You know, the idea from like a consumer perspective of being involved in the network at such a fundamental level. And then also, of course, like earning money, like whilst I sleep. That just sounded amazing. And built a bunch of tools for miners. I invented a flat packable, stackable, open air frame for GPU miners. And got involved in a bunch of other things. I built a payment gateway called Globy, which was a crypto-focused payment gateway. And then at Monero's outset, I got involved at the beginning and became lead maintainer. And that was really interesting because Monero was the first altcoin, and this was 2014, early 2014. It was the first altcoin I'd seen that offered something that was truly interesting, not just like pipe dream stuff or, like overly flexible programmability, but like something that was really innovative, both from a scaling perspective, an on-chain scaling perspective, and of course the privacy aspect, which was very important to me. I think that I'm a deeply private person, which is ironic given that I'm a public figure. But I've learned to sort of delineate between what in my life is okay to be public and what in my life is private. And I feel like it's important for everyone to have access to privacy enhancing tools, whether, for whatever they want to do, whatever they want to think, and whatever they want to believe. And I feel like we've kind of backed ourselves up into a corner because we've created a world where privacy isn't important and where we gladly use tools on a daily basis that do not enhance our privacy. We just sacrifice it for the sake of convenience. And Monero really resonated with me because it made different choices there.
Is there any particular reason? I like what you say about, for the sake of conveniency, we are using a lot of tools that actually go in the opposite direction, and we are making all of our data public, and it's being used to train AI models, to do a million things, right, for commercial purposes, etc., etc. Is this something you were always concerned about, or was there something in your life that you go like, hey, no, I realize how much this information is being used? How did that came about?
Yeah. So it's something I've always been interested in. I've always been part of like the InfoSec community. That's been a big focus area, cryptography in particular. And I remember going to early DEF CONs and being enamored with like the privacy village and like a lot of the villages that like even if they weren't privacy focused, privacy became a part of it, like DEF CON loves encryption. DEF CON loves tools that allow you to both break and enhance your security and privacy. And it's kind of funny because I feel like when it comes to infosec, it's very similar to traditional security. If you think about how you secure a house, yeah, you can get a guard dog, you can get an alarm, you can put razor wire at the top of your fence. There's all these things that you can do, these active systems. But frankly, the best thing that you can do to secure a house is just close your curtains. Like people shouldn't be able to see like the size of your TV. If you buy a new TV and it gets delivered, like try and do, how can you deliver it surreptitiously? Do you now take the giant 95-inch TV box and put it out on the curb so everyone knows you've just bought a 95-inch TV? Like there's value in just obscuring what you own, so that a thief that walks past goes for a softer target, goes for the target that is more or louder with what they own. Like the fancy cars are parked out in the driveway instead of in the garage. And so that's sort of a core part of information security, is like information isn't a target if the value of the information is obscured, if the value of the information is hidden. You still have to have the other aspects of it. You still have to have defense in depth. But if you can at least hide the value of the information, that's a massive step. And that's been my observation and something that's really driven me. So I wouldn't say it was like a single thing. It's just been part of that culture, going to like 2600 meetups in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s, and really like being ingrained in that culture has like shaped my worldview at a time when I think privacy was something that we were still quite naive about.
Yeah, very much. Um, Now, crypto has had its ups and downs over the years. What do you believe is working well in the industry right now, and what areas do you think still need the most improvement?
Yeah, good question. So I think that the things that are working well is um we've we've done some cool stuff, and I'm seeing some of that resonate, like it's funny, but one of crypto's greatest successes has been Tether, and not just Tether in the general sense, but Tether specifically on Tron, which is such a it's such a weird thing for me to have to say that, but Tether on Tron is massive, absolutely massive in the global south. It's huge in Southeast Asia. Every time I deal with people in Thailand or Vietnam, they're always like, "Oh, can you send me USDT on Tron?" And a lot of them just use Binance. Like that's their wallet, is like centralized Binance. And they want to give me their Binance, I guess their Binance username or whatever, like that little Binance code. And they just send it, yeah. And I'm like, oh, can't you give me like an ERC20 address and I'll send it to you on Ethereum? And they're like, no, 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 the fees are too high. They want it on Tron. And they'll give me a Tron address. And I'm the poor sucker that has to go figure out how to like, get my tether on Tron to send it to them. But it's an insane success because Tether's kind of become like a de facto CBDC, and it's doing really well on Tron in the global south. And I think that that is something that more people need to pay attention to. Like, why? Why has that worked? Why has Binance worked? It's not like there haven't been other exchanges, in that area. Like, why has Binance taken off so well? Why has Tether taken off so well? And why has on Tron been so, game changing in Southeast Asia? I think that's something that people need to really dig into and understand. Nobody in Southeast Asia is using Aave or, farming yams or buying NFTs. Like they just don't care. But they're using Tether on Tron on a daily basis to live. So there's a lesson in that. I think we're sometimes focused a little bit on the wrong tools. And that sort of brings me to the second part of your question, is what needs improvement. I think usability needs improvement. And maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe part of the issue for why people in that part of the world aren't using other things is because they're just not as usable. And part of usability is scaling to some degree, and part of it is low fees to some degree. Like those are all aspects of it. But like I think possibly where Binance has nailed it is just usability. Maybe Binance is just easier to use than other exchanges have been for a normal user that doesn't want to see an order book, that doesn't want to do leverage trading. They just want to hold crypto and swap, and they don't mind giving over their KYC data for that.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of people in South America as well, still in South, as you said, right? But Binance is very much used in South America. Um, Now, let's talk about governments, right? They are still grappling with crypto regulations. How do you think the regulatory environment will evolve over the next few years? And how do you think the crypto community should engage with governments and regulations?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think that um I have I look, I've been one of those people who has held the view previously that like, oh, crypto is going to destabilize governments, and then governments are just going to have no choice, but they're going to accept it. And I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I think that, crypto is about empowering individuals firstly, and then empowering corporations maybe secondly. But at the end of the day, crypto is competing against governments that have like tanks and guns and bombs. And so we're not going to like destabilize governments. They're not going to fall apart just because crypto exists, and I think that that's important for people to understand. And so if that's the case, then there's and if you think about it in the context of it empowering people, empowering corporations, then there's an interesting thing that happens, and that is that individuals and corporations, especially those that have a lot of wealth or wield a lot of power, are able to play regulatory arbitrage. So if you're playing in a jurisdiction and that jurisdiction is not crypto friendly, then maybe it's time to move. Not you don't have to move yourself, but you can offshore your assets, you can offshore your company, you can offshore a whole bunch of things. So playing regulatory arbitrage is like really, really, I think, an interesting approach. And I know that can become really challenging. I mean, I don't know if you heard about the Prospera thing that happened today, but the Supreme Court in Guatemala said that the government deal that created Prospera was unconstitutional. So now who knows what's going to happen with Prospera? And so there's organizations that have like housed themselves in Prospera, and now that's really challenging. Will they have to up and leave and go and incorporate elsewhere? Maybe. But at the end of the day, it's still, I think, is net positive because they've become more nimble as a result of going like, oh, we're going to incorporate in this, weird special commercial zone in Guatemala. We're going to take advantage of that cool regulatory thing. And being nimble from a regulatory perspective has massive benefits. And I do think if certain governments, and I think the US is a great example of this, if they continue to be anti-crypto, they're going to see very powerful, very wealthy individuals and organizations exit the US and just go elsewhere. And that is it's not good for the US. So, I think regulatory arbitrage is a thing that will ultimately force governments to support or end up bleeding. And no government is too big to like withstand billions of dollars exiting their shores. So, it remains to be seen what happens, but I do think that that crypto is an important or sort of being able to play regulatory arbitrage for crypto companies and crypto loving individuals is an important aspect to it.
Now, what are your thoughts on stable coins and central bank digital currencies? Some governments, their way of adopting crypto is just, okay, this is getting a lot of traction, now we will do it ourselves, right? But it's not what the crypto community really wanted, right? We're talking about decentralization, and now you're seeing central banks again sort of centralizing. Is it
Yeah.
What do you see, right? And how do these fit into the broader crypto landscape, and what impact do you think they will have in the finance industry?
So I think there's a couple of aspects there. The first is I'm curious to see like CBDCs, what they end up looking like from a regulatory perspective. And frankly, are they going to be that different to like USDC and Tether? Or are USDC and Tether just CBDCs, but instead of being central bank issued, they're central corporation issued? So there's a part of me that's just really curious to see like how that plays out. And I think like I mean like CBDCs might end up being really positive if they don't come with a whole bunch of like strings attached. Like if you can use a CBDC without having to KYC and have everything tracked and whatever, great, because then it's like cash. But if it's more like, like I don't know, you're being tracked by the central bank, but you're also doing it on a public ledger, so now everyone's tracking you, then it's worse. It's literally worse than putting your money in the bank account. And I get the feeling that governments aren't stupid. Or central banks aren't stupid. They recognize that whilst they might pull the wool over individuals and say like, oh, you don't need privacy, corporations are never going to buy that. Corporations will never want to function in a world where employees can see what other employees are earning, or other corporations can see what their customers are paying, or who their suppliers are. They'll never want to exist in that world. So that's super important. And I think that I do have some hope that there will be some CBDCs that might be interesting. And I think just because we love decentralization doesn't mean everything needs to be decentralized. I think that there are things that can have an aspect of centralization, and I'm curious to see how it goes and how it plays out.
And that brings us back to privacy coins like Monero and the increased scrutiny from governments. But what you say is right. I mean, governments are not dumb. There's a lot of activity that at the end of the day will benefit certain governments. Do you think there's a world where everything coexists and there are CBDCs that have further scrutiny, and then some of the existing more private cryptocurrency coexisting in that landscape?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I I look, I think that there's two things. Yeah, the first is that governments sometimes they need a scapegoat, they need a boogeyman, they need something to blame. And so maybe Monero has had a little bit of that. But at the same time, I think governments recognize, at least I hope they recognize that, Monero is just cash, and governments have no problem regulating cash. They've done it for a long time. They limit the amount of money that institutions can handle. They know how to play that game. And so my hope is that we'll end up in a world, in a regulatory environment where governments go, oh, okay, so if you're doing this, if you're using a privacy enhancing digital currency, then we're going to treat that like cash. You can kind of do whatever you want within reason, but the minute you start interacting with a centralized institution, then you need to do this. You need to like have this whatever it is, like a suspicious activity report filed above a certain value, whatever. There's all sorts of things that you can do, and bits and pieces that you can layer onto that at an institutional level. But person to person, P2P, like it's free game. Just like I can go and take $10,000 and walk across to my friend's house and be like, "Here's $10,000," and he's not going to be like, "Where did you get this from? And can I see some form of identification?" He's just going to take the briefcase and quietly put it in his room. And so, like that's like governments need to, well, I think to some degree recognize that that has to be allowed, like it's been allowed for eternity, and it's going to happen one way or the other. And I think that the thing that I'm hopeful of, and I know that not all regulators realize this, but I do think cooler heads prevail, or at least I've seen cooler heads prevail with some of the stuff. When you ban something, you end up having a chilling effect on consumers, but you don't stop the criminals.
Right.
So if you're going to ban, like the Flipper Zero is a great example of this. Like there's been some government talk, or regulators talk about, oh, the Flipper Zero, it could be used to unlock cars, as if there haven't been other tools that can be used to do that. There haven't been other like SDRs or whatever hacking tools in the past. The Flipper Zero just looks cute. And so, if you outlaw the Flipper Zero, which I think the Canadian government were like at one point were talking about that, if you outlaw the Flipper Zero, criminals are still going to get their hands on it. It's not going to stop a criminal from buying a Flipper Zero and bringing it in. What it is going to stop is researchers and infosec folk and pen testers and red teamers from accessing that. And so it's the same with something like Monero. You want to outlaw Monero, go right ahead. Criminals are still going to use it. And ordinary citizens, ordinary folk, law-abiding citizens who need that privacy for whatever personal reason, they're now cut off from it. And that's net negative. And so I'm hopeful that some governments will, or some regulators will realize that. And I have enough empirical evidence to think that they will.
Let's talk a little bit now about privacy as a whole, right? In the digital realm. Um, how do you think that will evolve in a world where data is flowing, faster than ever, and we are sharing more and more and more and more? Do you think there's a future where privacy becomes mainstream, or do you think it will remain a niche within the broader cryptocurrency ecosystem? Like when you look at people and society at large, how do you think about, how are we thinking about privacy?
Yeah, great question. So I do think that we've we have taken we've taken some steps forward in the privacy space in general. Apple's been very pro-privacy. They've been very loud about it. Some of their advertising has been very privacy focused. I think that there was a tagline, it's like privacy, that's Apple. And that's really positive because it just goes to show that like Apple believes that people care about it, about privacy, enough to make it a focal point, a feature. And even like Apple's AI stuff, they spoke a lot about, the efforts that they've taken to make it privacy enhancing. I think that speaks to some degree of like mainstream adoption or mainstream interest in privacy. Um, and it's not perfect. There's still a lot of organizations that don't take privacy that seriously. I think that OpenAI is probably a little bit in the middle. They're happy to cut deals where they don't store data for enterprise customers. They're, happy to if you have a whatever, like a team account or whatever, you can say, don't use my data to train your models. But then they're also harvesting everyone's individual queries for training data. So, orgs like OpenAI maybe in the middle. And then I do think Google has taken so much of a beating on privacy over the last few years that we might actually see Google do a little bit of an about turn. One thing I've seen that's actually like really warmed my heart has been Meta taking privacy more seriously, and open source as well. And that's really cool because Meta for a long time was one of the worst companies and organizations from a privacy perspective. They just like absolute disregard for privacy on any level. So I think it's good. I think like it's net positive, and I think that there's generally some positive signs and on the horizon. There is there's still a lot of work to be done. Both from like making privacy the norm and from helping regulators to see why this is important. But I think we're on the right path as a global tech community.
Very good. There's still hope. Um, Now, decentralization, right? It's always held up as a core principle in blockchain. Achieving it at scale is challenging, right? What do you think are the biggest hurdles to creating a truly decentralized system? And is it possible to achieve mass adoption while maintaining decentralization?
Yeah, great question. So I think the hurdles are um, several fold. There really are two that I like to focus on. The first hurdle is a lot of projects don't make decentralization a core principle at the beginning, and so they don't actually have a path to decentralization. It's very easy to go, oh, well, we're going to start off centralized, but then we're going to become decentralized. But what does that mean? And a great example of this is decentralization is more than just like the software. It's also how the software is built. And so, being on GitHub and using things like GitHub issues, GitHub projects, and those sort of things to allow external contributors to contribute is very important. Now, what sometimes happens when you're building, you want to move fast, and so you use you know project management tools like Jira or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with Jira at an organizational level, but when you move away from that and you're now going, oh, we're decentralized, we've got external contributors, and now you park Jira and you switch to using GitHub issues, your developers go, well, we love Jira, so we want to stick to that, and now we can't use GitHub. It's a mess. Oh my gosh, how do we do that? And meanwhile, external contributors are going, can we see the history of like how you made this decision? Can we see the history of like why this code was added? And there's none of that because it all lives in Jira. And so that's why it's sometimes that transition path is so challenging. So I think a hurdle is like how do you force the traditions that are going to be used later on as you become more decentralized from the very beginning? How do you architect it into every core part of your project, even if it means you move a little slower, even if it means it's a little bit more difficult and chunkier to develop, but at least you know that as you become decentralized, like you're just using the same tools, the same systems, the same methodologies, the same mechanics. So that's important, and that's the one hurdle that I see. The other hurdle, which I think speaks to your point or your thought on mass adoption, is it is again the user experience. You know, it's difficult to take a a user experience that would be beautiful if it was centralized and then do the same thing for something that's decentralized. That is really challenging, and I think it takes a certain type of UX developer, UX designer to embrace that and go, this is tough. This is really tough to do, but we're going to figure out how to do it. We're going to figure out how to do it in a way that still preserves the decentralization, but delivers a beautiful user experience, even if it means the level of engineering effort is much higher. And that's something where I sort of feel a lot of developers are afraid of the level of effort, the level of engineering effort, and a lot of UX designers just assume that, you know, stuff like, oh, we can just make them sign up with a username and password. No, we can't. But there are other things we can do. You know, there's aspects of passkeys that we can use to still deliver a really powerful experience while allowing people to own their data, own their access, own their keys. You know, we can do better, and I do think that some UX designers are starting to think down that path, and that's really cool to see.
Very clear. Now, you have been always a pioneer on this space. What innovations in blockchain technology are you most excited about right now? And what emerging trends or technologies do you think will have a major impact on the future of crypto?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of missing pieces in crypto. You know, I think there's a lot of fundamental stuff. Even in like the developer ecosystem in crypto is pretty bad. And I I'm excited about better plumbing, to be honest. I know that's not very sexy, but I just feel like, you know, anyone who's used some of these like AI coding tools, anyone who's used Claude or Copilot or Cursor to try and like do some coding, um, gets that like wow feeling, like wow, this is, you know, I'm a developer, but man, this makes my life easier. And then you see people who have very little software development experience using those tools to build something. And yeah, okay, the thing they're building might not be that well architected, but it works. And that's really cool, like really lowering the barrier to entry. And I'm excited about plumbing that lowers the barrier to entry. I'm not excited about another L2, you know, that has like claims of this and claims of that. I'm just excited about like how do we make it easier for developers? Because I have this theory, and the theory is when you lower the barrier to entry for developers, you end up with a sea of trash. You end up with tons of very bad, very stupid projects. But out of the sea of trash, you have gems that emerge. And we're seeing this in AI right now. Man, there are so many AI projects that are just trash. They're just hot garbage. They're basically ChatGPT wrappers or just nonsense or just like 10,000 versions of like, take a photo of your house and we can like change the interior. Woo. Um, but out of the sea of trash, there are some really cool projects that emerge, and I'm excited about that. I'm excited about the cool stuff that emerges when you lower the barrier to entry. So we need to do more of that in crypto. Just lower the barrier to entry, lower the barrier to entry, make it so that developers who are not very good, who haven't touched code maybe ever, can write something cool, even if it's not well architected. Give them the ability to do it relatively securely and let them play on the front end or whatever. That is cool. That's amazing. And I think that that will fundamentally advance the space because there's no lack of enthusiasm and money, but I do feel like the crypto space is kind of petered out a little bit. And the only way to move forward is to bring on a new wave of developers who build cool stuff so that there is a new wave of users. And reinventing the casino 17 different ways doesn't change that or doesn't fix that.
If you could offer one piece of advice to both crypto newcomers and veterans alike regarding the future of the space, what would it be? Is it related to leveraging AI to just get more stuff done, or what would it be?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I don't think like I love AI. I don't think that, using AI tools is something that is necessarily going to tilt the wheel for or tilt the balance for every single builder. But I would say that one of the things that I would encourage anyone who's building something is just focus on the user experience, make the user experience beautiful. That is such a fundamental missing piece. Don't focus on, you know, more TPS or whatever. Focus on a beautiful user experience. And then for end users, excuse me, for end users, I think get a hardware wallet, please. Please just put your stuff in a hardware wallet. You know, try not to have more than like $150 worth of stuff in your hot wallet. Like, get a hardware wallet. It's 2024. Like there's so many different ones. Just, get one of these doodads, and use it because people are still in 2024 making like getting fished and making bad decisions and losing money. Get a hardware wallet, please.
Very, very, very clear. Um, Ricardo, one last question to you, and very random. What do you do when you're not working?
I have taken up photography. I took up photography just over a year ago. So I shoot a lot of medium format, and I'm really enjoying shooting medium format, everything from portraiture to landscapes. And then more recently, I started bird photography. Not medium format bird photography. That would be challenging, but like, I went and did my first bird photography session a few days ago, and it's like on the one hand, it's kind of boring just sitting around waiting for birds to like to be there or like moving through gardens, but like on the other hand, it's kind of beautiful and peaceful. And yeah, I'm enjoying it. I'm really just thoroughly enjoying it as a hobby. There's something incredible about being able to capture moments and freeze them in time, and then revisit them later on and try and tell a story with that. So yeah, that's been a hobby that has started to take up a lot more time than I expected.
It's beautiful and it forces you to be in the moment, right?
Yeah,
And yeah, no. I love photography. My father is very big on photography, and I don't know if you can see it on the back end, but I have a few photos there that I've taken. Those are seagulls,
nice.
right? They were just standing there, and that's on, I think that was on San Francisco and Huntington Beach. But they were just standing there, right? So it was easy. I had like a big tele, right? And I would put the thing
Nice.
in front of them, and they were like looking at me standing, right? So it allowed me to do some great stuff. But no, I love it. I love it. Thanks for sharing that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Ricardo, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, for being so open about your views and your experience. I think this is going to be great for our audience, I'm sure. And I hope that we can do this sometime again in the future.
Awesome, Matteo. Thank you so much for having me, and really enjoyed chatting to you. And yeah, would love to chat more in the future.